Hey, how's it going, dudes and dudettes? Brad the Guitologist here. In this video, we're going to take a look at a couple of what I think are late 1950s or early 1960s ALTEC 438A compressor amplifiers. So what these are, they are a really early kind of, well, they're a compressor, but they also have a preamp built in. There are a number of limitations on this particular model that we are going to address, namely that the compression function really has no controls. You can't adjust the thresholds or the release time or any of that kind of stuff for the compression action. We're going to go through how this compressor actually works schematically. We'll look over that, and then we'll look at different ways that we can upgrade one of these units. So if you own one of them, you can make it much more functional and much more up-to-date, kind of useful in a 21st century sort of recording setting. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, stick around. Okay, we're going to look at the manual for this unit to get an idea of some of the capabilities and limitations of this particular model, the 438A. This one does not have some of the functionality of a modern compressor that you might expect. There's no way to adjust anything except for the volume on the preamplifier section. If we look at the schematic for this, the input comes in here, goes through a transformer. There's actually two different ways that you can put signal into this. You can do a high bridge input here, which bypasses the first gain stage. If you want to plug in a microphone, you plug it in here. It goes through the impedance transformer into the first stage. Out of the first stage, there is one volume control that is right here. It sets in between the first stage and the second stage. Then it goes through a second preamplifier gain stage, and this is a 12A-Y7, by the way. Then it goes through another transformer, which splits the signal, and then it goes into 6BC8, sort of like a phase inverter. This transformer, it splits the signal into two directions, so we've got the right half of the signal, or the down wave, and the up part of the wave goes to the other side. Then it goes on to a 6CG7 for the output, and then on to the output transformer. But here's where the compression part comes in. Here, before it goes to the output transformer, you can see right here on this side, there is an offshoot that comes down here and goes to 1/2 of a 6AL5, which is a dual diode tube. On the other side of the wave, you have something similar here through a coupling cap, and you have a coupling cap down here. And here, of course, there are the references to ground. But this tube is what controls the compression. If you want to use this unit just as a preamplifier, you can pull this tube, the 6AL5, and there will be no compression. So basically any signal that's sent over here will just kind of go nowhere. So what happens is, anytime that you have signal over a certain gain, which is determined by the value of these capacitors and these resistors to ground, you have signal that is sent through this diode. So this will allow only the positive through. So the positive waveform, when it goes positive, goes through this side, and then the other side goes positive, goes through this side. So basically this is like turning the AC signal into a DC voltage at this point. And this DC voltage comes over here and affects the biasing of this tube to the, it's almost like an automatic gain control of sorts in a radio. That changes constantly as the signal changes. So that's how roughly is compressed. That's how the compressor works. You'll see I've got some marks here. I've got a little arrow here and an arrow here. Got this arrow here that denotes this control. There are some things we need to do to bring this more up to date. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically turn this 438A into a glorified 436C. And the interesting thing about this is this 436C is a compressor only, whereas this one is it's a preamp and a compressor. It's also worth noting that the 436B Altecs are the models that the Beatles used in all of their recordings in EMI Studios, which later became Abbey Road Studios. Paul McCartney was famously a huge fan of Motown, and these were the same compressors that were used in the Motown studios. Realizing some of the same shortcomings that I've denoted here, EMI engineers got a hold of these and modified them before installing them in the studio, adding some much-needed upgrades. These Altecs can be heard on pretty much all of the later Beatles records, also records by the Zombies and others who would have recorded in Abbey Road. We are not going to do the EMI mods here, but I just bring that up because it's an interesting sidetrack. Since we're using the 438A amplifier, these will also be in some ways even better than the ones that the Beatles use because they'll have more preamplifier capability. You'll be able to drive them a little harder. One other interesting note on these two specimens is that they came from a warehouse in Seattle belonging to one-time road manager of Paul Revere and the Raiders. So it's a good chance that these might have actually appeared on some Paul Revere and the Raiders recordings or maybe road shows. It's a compressor amplifier, essentially. This one's called a compressor amplifier also, but the preamp really isn't as strong, and you can kind of see why here in a second. And it also has more controls. I don't know if you could see it on the front, but there are controls on the 436. If you look at this closely, there are controls here, and there's a control here. Now, they're controlled with screws that you just basically set and you don't really adjust. But those controls are for the threshold and release time. So it has more controls. And then you'll see where those controls are and how we're going to be able to upgrade the one that we have to something more usable with more controls on it. Okay, if we look at this one, it does not have the 12AY7 tube. So you can see here that, this one has the input transformer, the mic transformer, and it has a 12AY7 tube with 2 stages. This does not have that. This has a transformer, but this transformer really is more akin to this one right here. So we have this transformer kind of the same as this, and then everything from here over is very similar. We have the 6BC8, 6BC8, and then we have the 6CG7, 6CG7. So, it's kind of similar from this point over. It also uses the 6AL5 for compression, but this one, if we look closely, it's a little bit different because it has some controls. One of those controls is here, right here, and then one of the controls is here, instead of that 1 meg just fixed resistor that we had up here. You can see this 1 meg fixed resistor. On this one, we have a variable. Right here, we also have this variable, and we have nothing over here. One of the things I thought might actually add to the usability of this. Oh, also, there are controls here. There's a 50K pot here and one here, and it looks like they're tied together. So you actually have a volume control here as well. So here's what I thought we might do. This one does not have that control. You see just a fixed 47K resistor here and here instead of the dual variable. So what I thought we might do is order a couple of these dual variable 50K pots to turn this into a control. We're also going to obviously add this control, but also what I would like to do is simulate what the manual talks about when it talks about pulling the 6AL5 tube to stop the compressor altogether, to switch the compression completely off so that you can simply use this as a preamp. And what we're going to do actually is add a switch that just severs these lines right here going to this tube. So it'd be the same as if you just pulled the tube. So we're going to add this switch. We'll add a control here, a control here, a control here. We need to add a 3-prong cord, change all of the electrolytics, and just generally service it. But that is the game plan for this thing, and that's the way we're going to approach it. Then we might test it out and see what other things we can do, maybe to, I don't know, to sweeten it perhaps, or just kind of go from there. Okay, so here we are inside the unit. First thing I notice is that the power cord has been replaced at some point, but it was just taped on. We're going to change that anyway, so all that's going to go. We also have changed out, somebody has changed out the capacitors, but they've just tacked them on across the old capacitors, which is a big no-no. You don't ever really want to do that, because if you have bigger problems with the old capacitor, if it's leaky, you know, things like that, this is not good. This is not going to be an efficient solution. Also, we have a selenium rectifier here. There should be 2 diodes. I guess there's 2 in that one package. We're probably going to change the selenium rectifiers on both of these to silicon rectifiers, and we will probably have to do something about any excess voltage that presents. We may have to add some series resistance to mitigate excess voltage, but perhaps not. It just kind of depends. We might also go ahead and remove the old cap cans. What I may do actually is just take all this out of here and put in some terminal strips to get all of our power resistors and caps up on some terminal strips over here, and maybe just leave the cans in place. We'll see. We've got these old mica mode. We've got to get rid of those capacitors. That's an old I don't know the status of that capacitor. That might be okay. These usually are not good. These over here may be good. We'll have to check those. We may just shotgun all the capacitors in this, except perhaps the ceramic ones. We have a little electrolytic over here, a little dry electrolytic. That one might be fine, but it's let's see, 1 microfarad at 50 volts. We'll probably go ahead and change that one also. So yeah, we've got a lot to do in here. This is kind of cool because it's just got 2 screws to get into this thing. So if you have a problem with the unit and you need to service it, you take out these 2 front screws, and the front panel is on these little hinges on both sides. You can see that hinge right there. It's on these hinges, so the thing kind of slides out and just sort of sits there like a shelf, so you can actually, I guess, troubleshoot it while it's still in a rack, which I guess is kind of cool. I mean, it's a cool thing. But we're going to add some more controls to this, so I'm going to probably take this front panel completely off so it'll be easier to drill. It'll also just give me easier access to everything in here. So yeah, we got a lot to do, so let's get to it. Okay, so I have skipped ahead just a little bit, and I've gotten one of these completed. So all of the wiring on this front panel is now complete. Okay, this is the switch that disconnects the compression tube, so you don't have to pull the compression tube to make the compression stop. This one, this dual gang pot, is the master volume that's a little bit further downstream from this original volume. So yeah, that's it. That's it for one of them. Now we just got to duplicate basically everything we did on this one on the other one, and we'll have a complete set. Okay, I think before I go any further with this, I want to see what the waveform is looking like, just out of curiosity. I've got a signal injected into the front end. I want to come off of the back end. Well, come off of the output over here. I'm also going to go to that little amplifier on the desktop so you'll be able to hear it. I don't have the correct preamp tube in it, for one thing. For another thing, I don't know if the impedance is correct. I'm going with the output. There's two different outputs. Right here. We got a 600 ohm and a 150 ohm output. Okay, on this one, 4 and 3 are tied together, and 2 and 1 are tied together, and then we've got a ground. The output of the 438, when terminated with 600 ohms resistance, is of sufficient level to operate directly. Well, I mean, you can hear it. You can hear it. So, I mean, I think the level is fine. Let's go ahead and... I'm going to kick this on, actually. Let's just go ahead and kick it on. And we'll look at the... scope and see what it looks like on the scope. I need to put a lamp in here, so we'll be able to see a lamp. Okay, there we go. We're coming up with something here. Looks like noise. Oh, that's why. There we go. And can we hear it? Nope. Why can't we hear it? Why can't we hear it? Oh, that's why. That's why we don't have it hooked up to this. That would be why. All right. So that there. All right. All right. Okay, there's a pretty looking waveform over there. I'm gonna turn that way down. We don't really need that to be that loud. Just nice to hear that it's there. Okay, I want to play with the volume. There's volume 1, so that one works. It's doing its job. Here's the master volume. It also works. This one is the... Okay, that's threshold. This is release. Yeah, the release is the one that we're going to have trouble with. Okay, I'm going to turn the threshold all the way one direction. I might have that backwards. Let's see. No, I don't. If I turn the threshold down, that means that's going to, at a lower threshold, it's going to compress more. And if I had a 12AX7 tube in here, you'd probably even see, you might even have enough gain across in this first stages to notice that compression. But I want to see something. Hang on. get our divisions up a little bit. Alright. Alright, yeah, let's go with that right there. And we'll turn the threshold all the way down. Okay, so you can see that that's working. That threshold control is working. We won't be able to see, because there's no percussion really. It's a steady signal. You're not going to be able to see the release work. But we should be able to see a change in the waveform when I switch this on and off. I would think. Let's see. Okay, yeah, you can see the compression right here. It is going up. You can see the right here, decibels of compression. You can see right here. When I turn this threshold, the new threshold control up, so I'm bringing the threshold at which the compression will kick in higher. That means there's going to be less compression, so that goes down. That is working correctly. So then when I turn it down all the way, it's getting more compression. See there? And again, you can see that on the scope over there as well. You can see that actually working. Okay, I think the thing to do at the moment, like I said, there's really no way to test the release. I think I do want to go ahead and get a this thing calls for on the preamp. It's supposed to be a 12AY7. I've got a 12AT7 in there right now because I think that's what this was sent with. The other preamp and the other one was broken when it arrived, so that I'm going to have to provide one. But I want to see what it looks like with a 12AX7 in that first preamp tube socket. So let's just go ahead and kill the power to it, and we'll stick a 12AX7 in it and see what that looks like on the scope. I would suspect if I don't change anything, it's going to be much louder. Okay, here we go with a 12AX7 in there now, so we'll just fire that up and see what it looks like on the scope. There we go. Let's see. Ooh, that is a very microphonic tube right there. Aha! We only had half of the tube working. I wonder if that was the case with the other one. I had to wiggle the socket there. Okay, I'm going to turn the post down. I'm going to turn the preamp all the way up. Okay. We don't need that blaring at us. Now we'll be able to at least see over there, though. I want to drive it. I want to be able to drive it and see what it looks like driven. Because you want to be able to drive a preamp, really, to get, you know... there's a lot of instances where you would like to be able to drive it a little bit. Okay, that's working. You can see there. The compression, when I turn it on, okay, watch this. Here, the switch is working for sure now. I just turned the compression on. You saw it go way down like that. That's without compression. Without the compression tube on. And now if I sever, and what I'm doing with this switch is I'm actually just severing this line and this line that lead into the diodes on that compression tube on the 6AL5. So when I flip it up, I'm closing those lines, and that's kicking the compression in. So what that's doing is that's feeding the signal back off the output through this diode, and it's the compression is kicking in. It's certainly a better unit, much more useful. I mean, as you can tell, when you've got this amount of control, you can turn the, when you can turn the compressor off completely if you want, and just drive the preamp. That really makes this a more versatile unit in my mind. So let's see if we can get some matching knobs. We need a matching knob set to throw on this. I think, do we want to go with what's already kind of here? We'll look and see what we got. But yeah, let's throw some knobs on it for him. Okay, the tube that was sent with this in the V2 position is a 6BZ7. It's interesting because the 6BZ7 and the 6BZ8 are practically the same tube. They use the same wiring diagram. If we look at the RCA manual, the terminal designation for the type of terminal that this tube uses is the 9AJ, and if we look at the other compatible 9AJ wiring, we see a 6AQ8 is compatible. That's an ECC 85. Usually if you see something with an ECC number, that's going to mean that it's a common enough tube that it has an American and a European equivalent. This would be fairly common, probably also a ECC 88. So you probably see that a lot. But looking through these, it looks like the ones with with the highest amplification factor, or mu, are the 6AQ8 and the 6JK8, which has a different amplification factor for each triode. But the higher one is like 70. This one has amplification factor, I think 57 on each half. The one that it calls for is the BC. Is that right? Yeah, the BC8. Okay, the BC8 or the BZ8. Like I said, same thing, same tube. But it's interesting that some of these tubes have a 8 at the end and some have a 7 at the end. It's just interesting. So what's in here is a BZ7. It does work, but the amplification factor is like 36 on the BZ7. I think I want to bump that up a little bit. I've got a couple of new old stock ECC 85s or 6AQ8s, and these are indeed new old stock. This one's a Zenith, and it's made at the Mullard factory by the look of it, Great Britain, but labeled Zenith. So there's one that we can use. 43rd week of 1975 on that. It's interesting because it has Great Britain on it, but it also has the 188-5, which is the indication for GE. GE had some kind of deal with Mullard, I believe, for distribution. Perhaps, I'm not 100% sure, but this one is a GE labeled. Again, made in Great Britain, so probably made in the Mullard factory. 6AQ8 or 6ECC 85. So this I'm going to put in the V2 position, and that's going to bump up the gain of that V2 position. Okay, so I have a microphone hooked up to this thing now, and it's just going through my little bench amplifier up here. So disregard the tone. It's not going to tell you anything about the tone. Check 1, 2, particularly when it starts feedback. Test 1, 2. Okay, but this will at least show how the controls work. So you see the compression needle here. It will dive down when I speak because, you know, the higher the input volume, the more compression is going to occur. And you'll see the needle return, and you'll see how fast it returns to the top here, like this. You see how it's returning up here to about 10. Okay, now if I change the release time, you'll see that take longer and longer to get back up there. Watch. Test, 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 test. Check, 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 check. 1, 2. Test, 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 test. If I turn the release time all the way down, it'll go back up the quickest. Threshold. Here's the threshold control. We should get a chance to see that. I'm going to put the release time. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Okay, the threshold, if you turn it all the way down, that's going to give you the most compression. Because, you know, tinier noises are going to be compressed at that point. Smaller signals, that is. Check, 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 check. If I turn it all the way up, that's less compression. Check, 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 check. Check, check, check. See how it's not diving down quite as far. Check, 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 check. Release time. Check, 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 check. See there? Okay. Now with this also, if you want the most compression out of the thing, you want to probably drive it to some extent. So you'll want to you'll want to turn down your you want to turn everything down going into the next, like your mixer or whatever this is going into. And of course, if you want less, if you want, you know, a more smooth tone, you can get that too, well, without going through a tiny desk amplifier for one. Check 1, 2, test, test. But this is it's very hot as it now stands. I put an old GE. I put a GE 12AX7 in it, in the front end, very much like this one here. This one came out of an old Wurlitzer from the late 50s, and the other one came out of a Hammond from the late 50s. So it's around the same time period as this. It just kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of nice to me to keep those around that same time period. Check 1, 2, test, test, test. Check, check, check. Check, check. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are now engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so dedicated, so conceived, can long endure. So anyway, you can see the thing works. It works better than it did really factory. This is a nicer preamp than the one that was put into Abbey Road by the Beatles, in my opinion. The 436, it actually has less gain stages. So, you know, it only has, after this first, it doesn't have that first preamp tube at all. It's non-existent in that model. So just different. I would call this basically a super 438 because it's it combines both the 436 controls and then some, and it has the 436 volume control as well after the transformer, the first coupling transformer. So you've got control over that volume, you got control over the pre-volume. Check, 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 check. So you can, kind of drive this front end if you want and get more of a distorted tone. Check, check, 1, 2. Of course, it's going to feed back like crazy because it's really hot right here. Because I'm right in front of this amp, it's facing right back at me, so it's a little bit different. But in a studio setting, if you had isolation and everything, you'd be able to crank this. Put it on snare or whatever you wanted to do, and you could, or bass or voice even, and yeah, could be a cool little tool. Anyway, so there's that. Now I've got to completely do the second one the same way that I did this one. So here's the advantage of doing something more than once, is you get to place the one that you've already done up on the bench and basically just make a carbon copy by looking this way. I don't even have to look at schematics. I don't have to design. This one, to be fair, probably cost 5 times the amount of, or maybe even 10 times the amount of thinking and time and stress than this one will cost overall, because I'm just able to look at what I've already done and just copy it right onto this one. I'm having to again rebuild the entire power supply, so all of these cans had to be popped out of here, put in a couple of terminal strips, which you could see right there. All of the power resistors are all replaced. Replaced the rectifier once again with a bridge rectifier. I just think overall these are going to be better units, and yeah, just like I said, definitely easier making the second one than it was making the first one. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. The design on these kind of took a little while. As you guys know, I've kind of been doing some different things with the channel of late. I've taken some time away from the bench. I've been doing some stuff outside, been doing some garbage picking videos. If you guys are just now getting back to the channel because the algorithm just told you that I had a new video, it's I've been putting out videos. It's just that they're not my usual fare. So if you want to see some unusual videos from me, you can look back at the last few months and see some highly unusual stuff that I've been making of late. But these came out really cool. Yeah, definitely something that you should do if you have a 438. Highly recommend doing these mods. There are some other mods that the EMI engineers did for the Abbey Road specimens. You can look into those, but I think what I did here really gives you a good overall amount of flexibility. And even in some ways, this is better than the Abbey Road ones because, again, this is a really hot preamp in addition to a compressor. So that'll do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and for now, we'll see y'all later.